So they say music is the universal language, and I definitely tend to agree with that. I think it's something that can connect people across countries, across cultures, across societies. It's something that we all share, whether it's a certain band or musician that we love, or a song that we love, or a type of music that we love. Music is there kind of in the background. I recently went to a concert, a guy that I never thought I'd be caught dead seeing, but my wife insisted I go with her, and honestly, I'm glad she did. So we went and saw Pitbull, and two things I noticed from that. One, the dude puts on a hell of a show. I'm talking amazing theatrics, pyrotechnics, the music, the choreography. It's fantastic. So that's one thing I really noticed is hell of a show. Had a great time from that perspective. But two, I didn't realize how many of his songs that I actually knew, and how many other people in the audience knew them and were singing right along with them. And that right there, I think, is almost the perfect example of how music can connect us all. So today's episode, we are talking not just about music in general, but music that meant a lot to us growing up in the 90s and early 2000s. Because don't forget, this podcast is all about you and me. We're part of Generation S.
What is it?
It's time to go back.
Welcome.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Generation S podcast. It's a podcast about growing up in the 90s and early 2000s. I'm Dan Kemp, along with my very special guest host today, folks. For the first time, I have a fellow podcast host joining me today. His name is Ryan, and he is the host of the Chaos and Conversation podcast, along with his friend Amanda. Ryan, what's going on, man?
Not too much. How you doing? Glad to be here.
Yeah, man, absolutely. So, listen, so full disclosure to our audience out here, I've known you for a long time. We've known each other for, I think, like 15 years at this point.
Yeah, what he's telling you guys is we're old.
We are old, and that's okay, because that's what this podcast is about. It's about growing up when we did. And, but we've, you actually, I can tell everyone, you're actually one of the first people I went to when I decided I wanted to do a podcast, because you've been doing podcasting for a little bit now. So you've definitely given me some great advice, some great tips, and we've talked about recording this for a while now, so
right.
I'm super excited to be able to finally do this with you. And today we're talking about music. When we talked about, hey, I want you on the show, what's something we could really go back and forth on? The first thing you said was music, and I said, I can do that, man. Let's do that. Let's talk about music, and it's not gonna be a deep dive into any specific genre of music. Really,
right.
What we're gonna do is we're just gonna talk about our experience with music in different formats growing up. So we're gonna kind of go through that whole journey of just, how do we get into listening to music, which in and of itself sounds kind of silly, because you almost think like, well, I've always listened to music, but you think back, you really haven't. There was probably a time in your life when you really started paying attention to music. So we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about the types of music we like. We're going to talk about our CD collections, because that was a big thing for both of us, I know. We're going to talk about other ways we got music. We're going to talk about attending concerts, and then we're going to wrap up with how music has continued to influence us to this day, because again, the listeners that grew up in the 90s and early 2000s, I'm sure, are still listening to music. So we want to kind of talk about how, it's affected us to this day. So I guess let's just jump right into it, man. I can kind of start on this one. So for me, listening to music, when did I start appreciating and getting into music? So music was always on in my house. My mom, actually, we grew up near each other, so you'll know this. My mom used to listen to WCKM 98.5, the Golden Oldie station in Glens Falls, New York. And that was all she listened to, man. And she was born in the late 50s, but she would listen to music from the 50s and 60s. So I guess she never grew out of the music she liked. To this day, that's pretty much what she mostly listens to. So that was what was always on in our house, was oldies music. And it was fine. It wasn't offensive or anything like that. But I remember I got a little bit older. I started hanging out with friends, and I started hearing more current music on the radio. And I remember, I'd first gotten my first CD player when I was 12, maybe 13, and then got some random CDs. And we'll talk more about my CD collection, but my parents got me some random CDs, like, I mean, anything from Britney Spears to Don McLean and Lou Bega. So, I mean, I really had kind of an eclectic taste in music from the get-go just because of that. And then by the time I got to high school, I had a car and I had a radio. And so there was a few, I mostly listened to pop stations, but some rock, some country as well. So I got into it, at that point and really started listening to a lot of music. And then even going back to like junior high school, I would hang out at my friend's house and he would boot up WinMX. You remember that?
I don't think so.
You don't remember WinMX? Oh my God. It was a media player. So like wherever you downloaded your music from, that was like the ultimate player, and you could customize the layout of it and the colors. And
the first one I remember was Winamp.
Oh gosh. That's what I'm thinking of then, is Winamp. WinMX was the tool. It was like Napster where you could download the music. Winamp was the player. So that's exactly what I'm thinking about is Winamp. And you'll see, it's funny, we'll look on Facebook and we'll see people posting like, if you listen to music on this, your childhood was awesome. And I can confirm my childhood was awesome. So we would listen to the most random songs on Winamp because that was, he would download everything and it would just show up in this playlist and it would just, it looked like crap. But I mean, it was just like, it was cool, man. We could get music whenever we wanted to. And I don't want to be that guy, but kids these days, they just don't understand. They don't get it.
No, they don't. I do think it's appropriate to do a small deviation just to explain to your audience that you and I both have a music background in the sense that we both worked in radio.
Yeah.
Well, I didn't technically work in radio. I had an internship in radio.
Hey, you worked there.
Well, yeah, while I was in college. I chose not to go into the field. You did. You were probably the smarter one in that regard.
No, man. I got out of radio for a reason, but I had enough making $10 an hour for a living.
Well, my thing was, it was just, I think for me, it was just too overwhelming having to run the boards and have to just kind of like, my ADD is crazy anyway. So having to focus on so many things, it was just wild. And I think it was just too overwhelming for me.
You know what's funny too, and again, just to kind of keep going on this side tangent of radio, people assume that because I was a radio DJ for a few stations that whatever the genre is, I must love everything about that. Or they would be like, hey, what was the name of the fourth album that so-and-so put out? Come on, you're a DJ. You should know this. I'm like, dude, I got no idea. Like, I'm going to let everyone in on a little secret here when it comes to radio. And this may blackball me from the industry, but radio DJs don't pick their music, folks. They have a preset playlist that they have to go through. And in my case, I would literally not touch a damn thing until it was my turn to talk for 10 seconds to plug some kind of show or event that was coming up, which, by the way, was, again, sitting in front of me on a monitor. I didn't have to do jack squat in order to put out music, and I didn't have to think of my own stuff. And if I never work in radio again, that's probably why, because I just literally let the cat out of the bag there.
I do have a question for you.
Okay.
Was there a station manager that you worked for that you absolutely just could not stand?
Oh my gosh.
We don't have to name anybody, but just in general.
Honestly, everyone was pretty cool to me. I was I was a 19-year-old kid that didn't really know anything. So I just wanted to do good. So I was, I was a people pleaser. So I didn't really have an ego, at least as far as, my colleagues were concerned. I was the young guy that just wanted to learn everything I could. So I think the people I work with in general are always very good to me. I got along, with everybody, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
So, but anyway, man, just let's get back to music here. So, what about you? So, I mean, obviously, I'm assuming when you were a kid at some point is when you started listening to music.
I was always around music because Mom liked listening to it, but I don't think I necessarily paid attention to it until around the summer of '93.
Okay. That's pretty specific, by the way. Why? Tell me about that.
I mean, as old as I am, it's amazing that I remember specifics, but being from the general area that, you and I are from, there's a summer camp up in Lake Luzerne, New York called the Double H Ranch. And, for, by any chance that anybody's listening to that from up there, hi guys, I love you. But it was my first time going to a summer camp because obviously this is an audio podcast, so people won't be able to see necessarily. I was born with spina bifida, so I've always been in a wheelchair. And it was never really talked about that somebody in my situation could go to a summer camp. So when we found out about this, it's like we jumped at the chance, even though I can't jump. Even though I can't jump. But
you wiggled with joy.
Something like that. But one of the perks of going to Double H was a man named Charlie Wood co-founded the camp. He also owned a theme park that is still up in upstate New York. It's called the Great Escape, or now it's Six Flags Great Escape.
Yep.
And every session of camp or even now, they will go one day to the Six Flags Great Escape. Well, that first year, 1993, that the camp was open, we went there, and I ended up going on what they call the Magical Mystery Tour, which is also a music reference for anybody that listens that's older.
Yeah, that's the Beatles, right?
Yes, it was I believe it was either a song or one of their albums.
Yeah. I like the Beatles. I don't know enough about the Beatles to be able to tell you that. Even though I'm a radio DJ.
Yeah. But there was a scrambler ride called the Magical Mystery Tour, and I got to go on this ride with one of the girls from camp that I had a crush on at the time.
Oh,
and
nice.
It was my first time hearing Guns N' Roses' Paradise City, and that hooked me. And I've literally never been able to go a day without listening to music since.
You know, it's funny too, just to kind of go off on that a little bit, because I think a lot of people don't realize the core memories that are made where music is involved, and it's so easy. I think that's probably why you were able to evoke that specific time of your life, because that's a song that was so powerful for you. You could probably remember where you were sitting on that ride, I bet, or maybe just which side you were sitting on next to this girl. There's so many, I can tell you right now, there's so many songs that I listen to today that remind me of specific times in my life and like who I was hanging out with or what I was doing, or like, oh, this song they played all the time at the school dances, where I know that if this song came on, I was going to be out there. So, I mean, yeah, man, I think that's the beauty of music, is that it's such a part of who you are growing up, and really it cements itself into your psyche, and you can't get it out of there. Like, it's not going anywhere. You've been listening to music every day since, and honestly, probably me too at this point.
I think the thing that really cemented it for me and really kind of made music important to me was the following summer. I had actually gone back with camp, and the girl who was running the ride the first time I went in 93 was back running the ride in the summer of 94.
Okay.
Dan, she handed me a cassette tape with Paradise City on it from start to finish on both sides.
Oh my gosh.
And I think that's what really kind of stuck in my head was, wow, somebody that didn't know me went out of their way because they realized how much of an impact that song had on me at the time, and they gave me that tape. That, I think, really drove it home for me that music was going to be something important to me going forward.
That's amazing. No, oh my gosh. No, that's incredible, because again, the little gestures like that go along with it, and that just, again, further cements the positive experience you're having with this. And so I don't know a lot of Guns N' Roses, but I mean, in general, would you say you're a Guns N' Roses fan, or?
You're a radio DJ and you don't know a lot of Guns N' Roses?
Dude, shut up, man. Oh, whatever, man.
Well, for me, Guns N' Roses is nostalgia.
Okay.
And I say that only because when they attempted to put out that thing they call Chinese Democracy back in 2008,
yeah,
I realized Guns N' Roses was only going to be nostalgia to me. I still love everything they put out before that.
Yeah.
And Chinese Democracy, for what it was, wasn't bad, but it wasn't up to par with what they could have put out. But yes, I literally know every lyric to every song up until 96 when they first broke up.
And so, I mean, Does that all trace back to this experience at the Great Escape then?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Because, whether I even ride that ride now when I'm back up in New York, because obviously I live in Virginia now, but whether I'm back in Lake George and riding that ride, I go into Great Escape and all of the memories of that very first summer at camp come back.
Yeah.
So it's complete nostalgia.
There it is, man. Well, listen, let's talk about the types of music here that we were into. And again, I don't know if it's because it started with a CD collection that was so vast and varied for me that I just honestly don't have people say, well, what kind of music you listen to? And I got the cop-out answer. I like it all because I really do.
Yeah.
Growing up, like as a teenager, maybe I gravitated more towards some pop stuff. I'm not ashamed to admit, big boy band fan. And in fact, there's going to be another episode that may or may not air before or after this. I'm not sure yet. I'm going to be doing an episode with a friend of mine where we're literally breaking down the best boy bands of the 90s and 2000s. So which I'm very excited for because big boy band fan, NSYNC, honestly, Backstreet Boys, not so much. I would hear their stuff on the radio. It was fine. I guess if I had to choose which camp I was in, it was probably NSYNC. But I was a big fan of 98 Degrees, LFO. You remember them? They had like a couple of hit songs. So they were good. I'm trying to think of who else, like boy band wise. O-Town, remember O-Town?
Oh yeah.
The MTV experiment. I don't know, Making the Band, I think it was called. So, and then if you count Boys to Men as a boy band, I would definitely, they're definitely R&B, so maybe a different flavor, but big Boys to Men fan. I wanted to go see them when they were here in Atlanta a few years ago, and I didn't. So hopefully they come back around because I would totally go see them.
Yeah.
What about you?
As far as CDs go, I didn't actually start collecting CDs until I was probably 12 or 13.
Okay.
The first time I believe I ever saw a CD, and you being in radio, you'll probably remember these at least loosely. Do you remember when radios used to have these thing called showcases where you would call in and win like a whole mess of prizes just for answering certain questions?
Oh, yeah, like a prize pack or whatever.
My mom actually called in early in the 90s, and the very first CD she ever owned because she won it was the Sinead O'Connor Nothing Compares to You CD.
Okay.
That was because she won it in a radio showcase. So that was my first exposure to CDs. And I believe I actually stole that from her. I'm not sorry. I'm not sorry about it. It was a good CD, but
you borrowed it.
Let's permanently.
You borrowed it and never gave it back. That's fine.
Borrowed it permanently. I think the very first CD I bought, and I cannot believe I actually remember this, was Shaggy, Mr. Boombastic.
Oh my God, that's a great album. I actually know a few songs from that album.
Yep.
Oh my God. So if we're talking about the first CDs we bought, I think the first CD I ever bought was actually a wrestling CD. So they used to put out WWF at the time would put out albums called WWF The Music Volume whatever. And so I bought WWF The Music Volume 5. And I remember this because it had a picture of The Rock on the front, and he did a song about pie. And I didn't know until many years later what actually he was talking about when he talked about pie. But oh my God. And then I remember, like I said, I can only remember a handful of other CDs that I remember actually paying money for myself to buy. Because I also had, I mentioned I was in radio, so I would always get free CDs, but I also had family that worked in radio that would always give me free CDs as well. And then I would, get burned CDs from family and friends, as gifts. Mm-hmm. So I didn't really buy a lot of CDs, but I do remember I bought Creed's Weathered album, which to this day I will still listen to if I'm doing something around the house. I bought a Bryan Adams compilation CD. I bought, what else did I buy? Those are the big ones. And I think I bought like one of those now. That's what I call Music's. I can't, volume whatever. There's like hundreds of them now, so I couldn't even 83. Tell you which one. Is there 83? How do you know that? Because
of TikTok. Somebody just talked about it on TikTok the other day.
Oh my God. Geez Louise. It doesn't surprise me. It's crazy. Sorry, man. You've talked about a few different kind of genres here with the CDs you've owned. So, as far as the types of music, then are you pretty agnostic or?
Cliche as it sounds, I do listen to everything because for me, music is very connected to my emotions.
Yeah,
and I don't mean to sound weird by saying that, but it has to depend on the mood that I'm in, what I'm listening to.
Yeah.
A lot of what I've listened to over the last 4 or 5 years has been a lot of the hard rock, heavy metal, and what they called new metal.
Yeah. Okay. Well, new metal is like Limp Bizkit, right? Aren't they considered new metal?
Yeah, well, people say that Limp Bizkit started it, but when I talk about new metal, it's Linkin Park. Like that.
Okay.
That is my new metal.
And I honestly,
Linkin Park and Korn.
yeah, well, absolutely, man. And those were, again, I didn't listen to as much Korn. I had friends that did, and they always had the T-shirts on in school. I definitely love Linkin Park. That was, I mean, right before I got out of high school, they really took off. And so I was a big fan of them. Limp Bizkit, my sister got me into. So it is kind of cool seeing like Limp Bizkit kind of have their big comeback. Obviously, with regard to Linkin Park, very tragic with Chester and everything like that. But
yeah, that didn't sit so well with me a couple of years ago.
Yeah, well, and I'll tell you right now, though, I mean, and I guess this has not happened really with any other big bands where something like this happened. I don't think it tarnished their legacy as far as, you know what I mean? Like, I think it's, if anything, it makes you appreciate what you had more.
Oh, absolutely.
You know what I mean? Because I mean, they're truly one of a kind as far as that blend of, really, that's what it was. To me, I thought it was cool because it was like I was listening to a rap album, but at the same time, I was listening to a rock album, and either way, I felt really cool all of a sudden. So,
absolutely.
And side note, if you've ever done any kind of VR, it's one of my go-to songs when I play Beat Saber. In the end,
Dan, I would fall out of my chair if I tried to play that song. I've watched people on Twitch play that song, and I know that I would fall out of my chair. It would be if America's Funniest Videos was still at its peak, I would make sure that somebody would get that on video, and I would fall out of my chair and then send it into America's Funniest Videos. Bob Saget, we love you.
That's right, man. Bob's. Oh my gosh, another '90s icon going too soon. Oh man. Well, fair enough. All right. So let's. So we talked about kind of the music we like. We talked about our CD collections here. Let's talk about something that really isn't a thing anymore, just because of the accessibility of music. But I mean, let's talk about pirating music, man. You know, we grew up in a time period where it was easy. Well, I don't want to say easy, but it was easy-ish to get free music. Is it anything like it is today with Spotify and YouTube and all that? Absolutely not. But it was a way to get free music, and depending on how good your internet was, you could get an entire CD downloaded in just 8 hours, man. It was life-changing.
I think when we were young and it happened with everything that with Napster happened, I think at our age when that happened, it irritated us because we were the consumers of the music and we didn't really have an understanding of the industry and why it affected the industry. So I think for a long time, Lars Ulrich was very much hated because Metallica was the one that went after Napster.
Yep.
But once I got to be about probably 19, 20, 21 years old, I really started to understand why Lars did what he did.
Yeah.
And what's funny is, I don't know if you know this. Do you remember LimeWire?
I absolutely do. I didn't. So it's funny. We had LimeWire at school to download music. Yeah, I don't know if they either had a paid one or what, but my school had LimeWire. Sorry for it, Ann. I don't want to throw you under the bus there. But, no, I used Kazaa. That was my go-to.
Yep, I think I used them all. I didn't use Napster because that was technically before my time.
Yeah, my friend's older brother used Napster. Like we would reap the benefits of it. Like he would get music for us with his Napster, whatever. But yeah, the one I got was the same one my buddy Zach had, which was Kazaa. He's like, oh, you got to use this one. This is the best one. There's no viruses. That was the big concern, right? It's like you would switch providers because you would start getting viruses or whatever. Because back then it was the Wild West as far as that goes.
I remember the first one I used was LimeWire, FrostWire. There was one called Grokster, Grokster.
Okay,
that one was wild. That one was weird.
Now, what was weird about it? Just it had the music that you couldn't get anywhere else, or
but the way that it functioned, even to today's standards, the way that it functioned was weird. But the reason I bring up those is LimeWire is actually back.
Really?
LimeWire just came back recently but now it's more of an artsy type download thing, and they have people that obviously will put their music up there for people to download, but they also deal in what I guess is popular now, NFTs.
Oh God. Okay.
Yeah. But yeah, it was weird to see LimeWire come back, because I'm like, wait, did we jump back in time?
Oh, there's so many things that are coming back now, though. You think about it. I mean, that's probably one of the weirder ones, I'll be honest with you. Like, what possibly could they bring that is of value to society in 2022? But honestly, if it's like you say it is, where it's like artists that can get their stuff out there that may not have that exposure on other platforms, even things like Spotify or Pandora or what have you, there's still a lot out there on there, man. So it can still be difficult to get yourself noticed. Whereas, something like this, if it's really more specialized, I could see the benefits of it. Now, NFTs, I know Jack diddly squat about, and I'm not going to pretend to. So, and this is certainly not a podcast where we're going to talk about NFTs,
right?
Because good God, I don't need that in my life. But anyway, yeah, man. So Kazaa was really the only one I used at home. We used LimeWire at school, and you know what I remember? I used to, when I would download a song, like even if I didn't know it or whatever, like they would put every artist under the sun, like in the title. Like it was like, I Believe I Can Fly featuring R. Kelly, Limp Bizkit, Britney Spears, Aerosmith, NSYNC. And it would just list them all up, because it would just pick up any keyword search, because they wanted you to download their, whatever. Because wasn't there a thing where like if your stuff got downloaded, you were able to download more stuff because I know there was a lot of that peer-to-peer sharing or something.
I don't necessarily know if that was a correlation. If your stuff got downloaded, you got to download more stuff. But I will tell you, based on what you just said about, listing about like 60 artists for one song, that irritated the snot out of me.
Yeah. Because you know what it is, like you're downloading, like I'm going to download Fergie London Bridge. I don't need to see Madonna and whoever else was thrown on that. Like, well, I guess by the time Fergie came out, I probably wouldn't download music anymore. But,
right.
Going back to like NSYNC or whatever, like, gosh, like, I know it's NSYNC. Don't tell me this is the Backstreet Boy. And I wasn't smart enough to figure out how to go in and actually clean up the albums and the songs. And actually, because it's funny, I'll do that now. Like if I have digital music, I will organize it on my computer by album, title, whatever. Just because I don't want to say it's OCD or whatever, but like I have to be organized like that. Back in the day, I didn't know how to do that. And so literally, and it's funny too, because I remember I found an old iPod that I had bought for myself after high school. It was like my graduation present to myself that I used with my graduation money. Mm-hmm. And I got it to boot up for the first time in probably almost 10 years.
Oh, wow.
And I know, it was nuts. And, it didn't hold a charge or anything. I had to leave it plugged in. But I was listening to it, and I'm looking at the title of all the different songs on the screen, and I'm like, oh my God. Like, I don't, like, it took me a minute, but like I would see some random artist for this title. I'm like, oh my God, I know what that is. I remember downloading that, because what I would do is for years, I would download stuff on Kazaa onto my computer. And if I ever got a new computer, I would save it all to a flash drive or what have you. So I would keep the same songs with the same terrible format. Instead of re-downloading them, I would keep them for years and years. So I ended up like in 2015, like I was saying, having stuff that I downloaded in like 2000, just because I kept it all those years, and the quality was god awful. Like listening now, like to what you can get now, it was terrible. So, but anyway, man, pirating music is a thing, because, and again, this is one of those where kids just, they don't understand. Like you can literally listen to anything you want to, like at any time you want to, and that's it. Like you can listen whenever. So like people don't appreciate an album unless they just want to listen to, like, I mean, to them, they don't know the difference between an album and a playlist at this point. Let's be honest. Like they're listening to something, and it doesn't matter. Like it as far as like, you can't appreciate the fact that this used to be put out on a piece of plastic for us to buy and listen to. And that was all we could listen to. So we had to appreciate it more. Right. There's so many things like that, movies, video games, everything. We have so much choice now that we can't appreciate when we didn't have that choice.
Right. And I think you hit the nail on the head with that, is because I appreciated everything up until probably 2000, because that was what they started calling the technology age. You and I had the benefit of growing up before the technology age.
Yeah.
Granted, they say I came of age in the early 2000s because I graduated in 2003, but I really graduated and was an adult before the technology age. And I don't
really took off.
Yeah. I don't think kids today have the ability to appreciate what they have, because technology is growing at such a pace where they can't get used to something and get comfortable with something before the next new thing comes out.
Yeah. That's exactly right. And there's so many choices that you almost feel like you don't want to, like, I remember back in the day, like just going, like, not music, but like, let's say movies, right? I had a VHS collection, right? It was whatever was on my shelf. I'd be like, all right, I'm going to watch that. There's movies that I would watch all the time on repeat. Whereas these days, I almost feel, even me, like having experienced that, I feel like I can't rewatch something because that's time I could have spent watching a new show or new movie that just came out, and they're coming out all the time. And so it's, I don't know if they call that FOMO, you know, that fear of missing out, if that applies here, but the whole idea that you can't go back and revisit something because you're not going to be moving forward. And that's always what we feel like we have to be doing now, is moving forward in something. And that's stressful, man. It really is. I feel for the generation. Like I've got a son who's 7. I've got one who's 4, and you know, they're a little young for stuff like this. But like when they get older, I can only imagine what this is going to progress to where, I mean, is that going to do something to their psyche where they're like, oh my gosh, like they don't appreciate the simpler times because they never grew up with them. But man, they could really use those simpler times right now, I bet.
By the time they get to be our age, you and I are not going to recognize the world that we still exist in.
Oh no, absolutely not. I think anybody that's, you know, that sees that generational shift will say the same thing, obviously. So
yeah, my grandfather just turned 90 this year. So
oh wow, God bless.
I'd love to hear what he thinks of the world that he still exists in.
Absolutely. Well, you know, I don't know what we call that podcast. You know, for Generation S, would he be Generation A? I don't know.
Generation Jerry. Like,
there it is. Geriatric. There it is.
I'm sorry, Grandpa. I love you,
Grandpa. If you're listening to this, man, listen. Jump on the show. We'll do an episode. It'll be fun. All right, well, we gotta keep things moving, man. Hold on. Let's we're losing this. All right, so we talked pirated music, man. Let's keep going. Let's talk concerts. Now, I'm gonna go ahead and be full on here, upfront and honest. This is where you're going to probably have to drive, because I did not attend a single concert in my life until I was in college. And that was only because I got free tickets from the radio station that I worked at.
I usually try not to throw myself under the bus when it comes to concerts, because everybody always asks, what was your first concert? This, that, and the other. Yeah. My first concert was when I was 15. So it was 2000, summer of 2000.
Okay.
Britney Spears.
Dude, that's amazing.
It was the Oops, I Did It Again tour.
Absolutely it was. Of course. That's okay, so I don't feel bad. My first concert was Nickelback. Like, I don't care. It was amazing. It was Nickelback, Stained, and Daughtry. And it was so fun.
Oh my God, I was at that show.
Of course you were. I think we were friends at the time. We were talking about it on MySpace. I'm pretty sure we both went to that show. Now, I was with my girlfriend at the time, so we didn't go together. Obviously.
Right.
But that was the one that we were giving away tickets for at the radio station. And so I was like, well, okay, can I get a pair for me and my girlfriend? They're like, yeah, absolutely. So I grabbed a pair, and it was at the Saratoga Performing Arts Center, also known as SPAC.
Yeah, I've got 2 stories to tell you about that.
Oh, let's hear them, man.
So summer 2000, obviously I'm going to Britney Spears. It was at SPAC.
Okay.
And you know how they have the lawn is inclined going down
so
into
so everyone can see. I mean, it's good view.
So we're leaving, and obviously, you know, my uncle's with me at the time. He's pushing me up the incline, but there was another incline because there was a footbridge going over the parking lot so you could get to the secondary parking lot.
Yep.
This fool decided to let me go on an incline, and he screamed out, "Pedestrian bowling!" And I thought there were like 4 elderly people in front of me, and I thought we were going to give them a heart attack.
Well, did you knock them down?
I don't remember a lot. I don't remember barely anything from that show. But I do remember, and I don't know if you might have heard this too, from the Nickelback Stained and Daughtry show. Do you remember how congested that show was? Because SPAC oversold the show. So even on the lawn, it was so congested that you were closer than elbow to elbow.
I mean, I remember it being very crowded. I don't remember feeling overwhelmed, but again, it was my first concert. I think I just assumed this is what concerts were supposed to be like.
Yeah, you kind of maybe blocked things out.
Well, I had no idea. I remember
Right.
I remember it was crowded. I remember when I would go up to the railing right before you could go to the seating, because again, we had lawn tickets. I remember getting like crushed up against there a little bit. And my brother, who had gone with us, he's 4 years younger than me. So he was, I guess he had to been like 16 at the time. He had gone with my dad took him, and I remember my dad had to like kind of yank him out because he was getting like squished up against the railing, and he was a 5'10" string bean at the time. So he was like, "Yep, back up." So my dad would kind of pull him out there, but. I mean, so you're saying it was like oversold, so that was like a super crowded event?
It was oversold, and I had actually heard from a friend who was working security that Nickelback actually told the operators of all of the SPAC equipment that they were not allowed to turn the Jumbotrons on until Nickelback took the stage, or else they wouldn't play. So because they oversold the show, we could neither, or at least where I was, we could neither hear Stained and Daughtry or see them. Yeah. And the Jumbotrons didn't turn on until Nickelback took the stage.
That I remember. I remember that there were no Trons. I remember Daughtry. I think Daughtry I probably enjoyed more because I didn't really know a lot of Stained. But no, I remember that. So okay, I didn't know that was the reason why is Nickelback pulled a hissy fit.
That was what I was hearing. I haven't. Yeah. I mean, there's no way to confirm it because it was somebody that I know. So I mean, who knows if they were blowing smoke up my wheels? But
yeah. Okay.
But
I mean, we can always not cheat. We can tweet Chad Kroger, see if he answers for us. Like, listen, is this part of your gig?
I would rather not.
What else is he doing these days? Come on now.
Oh, I know. But out of the concerts that you've been to, because I mean, I don't know how many you've been to so far.
It's not a lot, man. It's probably less than 10 in my whole life, if I'm being honest with you.
What is the one that you remember the most?
The most. I mean, obviously that one being my first was very memorable.
Right.
I was part of a few concerts where I worked for the radio station, and so I was part of promoting them, and I was up on stage. So we talked before we started recording about Coolio and how you've met Coolio. I've met Coolio because he was headlining the Fly 92.3 Summer Jam 2008 concert that I was a part of for promoting. I got to go up on stage, so I met a lot of cool artists that day. So that, to me, is probably my most memorable, just because of, I mean, the fact that I got to go and do a lot more stuff than most concert goers could do and meet a lot of cool people. But from a pure performance standpoint, I'm going to be honest, man, I really loved Hanson. Because I went and saw them. I was working for the radio station, so I got free tickets, obviously, but it was mostly an acoustic set. And they were grown at this point because they were basically our age, right? When they first came out, they were kids and they got popular because of that. But man, if you haven't, I mean, like unabashedly, I am a Hanson fan to this day because if you listen to their stuff they still put out now, which they do, they're good, man. Like their music has aged wonderfully, and they even played a lot of their older stuff like Bop, right? I mean, that was like, you want to talk about a song that stood the test of time. They have a version of that they play that's all acoustics. They bring in some bongos for percussion, and dude, I got to tell you, man, I mean, it slaps. Like, it's legit good.
I think the benefit with them is they grew up with the industry instead of the industry keeping them in a bubble. Because
they certainly could have. That's the problem, is they could have been eaten alive by the industry and then come out of it, pretty rough on the other end, and they didn't.
As far as for me, the concert that I remember that I enjoyed the most was probably Guns N' Roses back in 2017.
Okay.
But let me tell you, the best experiences I've had going to concerts was I think it was 3 times I went to the Family Values tour that was at SPAC.
Oh, and nice!
It was the Family Values tour was the show that Korn put on every year, and they toured around the country. And there were so many bands that I got exposed to because of the Family Values tour, and it blew me away every year that I got to see it.
Yeah, that's like what's the one that like a lot of my friends, because I hung out with some pretty interesting folks back in the day. They would go. Is it Warped Tour? I never went.
Warped Tour is actually coming back. They actually ended for a little while, but my understanding is they're coming back.
Oh, nice. I got to let
Yeah.
my wife know because I'm pretty sure my wife went to that. She goes, oh, she's like, I had my black and pink Vans, or maybe they were Etnies. I don't remember, and she would bust those out, and her studded belt on her and her tight jeggings, or not jeggings, but they were bootcut jeans, I guess, with her Etnies and her band hoodie and her plastic bracelets that ran up to her elbow. My God, I married an emo chick, which is when I married. But when I met her, like, she had kind of grown out of that phase of her life. And so, I mean, when I met her, she was just some smoking hot bombshell in a pink dress. And I'm like, oh, this chick is beautiful. And I find out later, after we've been dating for a while, that she's like, yeah, I had purple hair. I listened to music that, where people wouldn't understand me, and I just, that's just how I live my life. And I'm like, okay, there it is. So, all right, man. Listen, before we kind of talk about the influence that music has had on us to this day, I mean, is there any other, kind of fond memories you have that, are related to music? Obviously, that story about, Guns N' Roses is killer. Do you have any other kind of core memories where music was kind of part of that?
Well, just to touch on the Guns N' Roses story a little, I had reserved myself to the fact that I was never going to be able to see them live. Because anybody who likes music understands that up until probably 2008, Axl Rose was a gigantic knob. And I'm not going to swear on your podcast because I know that it's family friendly.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
But he was a gigantic knob. But
not to you personally, but just kind of his
in general, that was the impression that everybody got of him.
Yeah.
But I saw that they were doing the reunion tour with him, Slash, and Duff, which was three of many of the original members, but it was only the original three. And then I'm like, so I reserved myself. I'm like, I'm never going to be able to see this tour. I ended up, weirdest thing. Do you remember 1-800-Flowers?
I do, yeah.
1-800-Flowers was running a promotion that if you bought 2 dozen roses, you got 2 free tickets to the show closest to you on their reunion tour. And Dan, let me tell you, I almost had a heart attack when I actually got in the running for those tickets.
So, okay, you had to buy 2 dozen roses. Who did you give them to?
My mom, who hates flowers.
Oh, man. You steal her Sinead O'Connor CD. You give her flowers that she hates. Are you the favorite son, or?
I'm the only, so I have to be the favorite.
Yeah, but you're also the least favorite by default as well.
It's an equal balance, dude.
That's fair. That's fair. All right.
So that's the benefit of being the only.
Yeah, it's true, man. No, another buddy of mine, he was an only child too. So he, I'll never understand that perspective because I grew up with 2 younger brothers and an older sister. So I've never been the only child ever in my entire life. So I can never appreciate that. But, listen, I've known you for 16 years. I know you're a good son. So just know that.
Don't inflate my ego. My head's already big enough.
Listen, man, it's all good. Well, listen, we're going to talk about inflating your ego a bit more here because we're going to wrap up here. Before we get to the ego inflation, though, let's just talk about it. So music has been such an instrumental influence in both our lives, it sounds like. I mean, you've already kind of touched on this, how your love of music has really carried over into your adult life. But is there anything else you want to touch on there? You talked about that Guns N' Roses show, which, by the way, I didn't even ask you, how was that show in 2017?
I sat there in awe the entire time, and my mom actually had to tell me that I was in tears. Like, that's how emotional I got at this show. I was so fixated on watching it, I didn't realize that I was in tears almost the entire time.
Yeah. That's how, you were drawn in, man.
Oh yeah. Music is an experience. Like, if you don't have an experience listening to music, you're doing it wrong.
Well, and it's funny you say that too, because that was actually something I was going to touch on for as far as how it's kind of impacted me to this day. There's certain, kind of like you, if I've got a mood, I've got playlists that I've built out for, like, if I'm feeling something like this, I'm going to listen to this type of music or whatever. It could be anything from, again, boy band music to hard rock to rap, whatever. It just depends on what I'm in the mood for. But you ever listen to songs where no matter how many times you hear them, you get that tingle in your shoulders. You're like, ooh, that just gave me, you get the chills, right? You hear something and it penetrates your soul. I mean, that sounds so stupid, but it just really affects you. And you can't really compare it to much else. The only thing I could say I could compare it to would be, being in front of an audience that's cheering for you, which I mean, I say that like I'm some big shot. No, it's literally like graduating high school is what I compare that to. It's like that feeling of everyone's there to see you and they're so excited for you. You get that chill, that rush. And then, watching movies, right? There's certain movies that you watch where you're like, oh, that scene is going to like get you amped up or, I'm not a huge Lord of the Rings fan, but there's a few scenes that if I watch that and I go, that is epic. And I just got the chills, you get the goosebumps. So I think that's the closest you can compare it to, but I think the difference is that you don't have to sit around and wait for it to happen in a movie. I mean, you get that gratification usually in 5 minutes or less for a really good song.
I got 3 words for you as far as a song that will this song specifically will, if I'm around people, this will make me turn around to them and tell them to be quiet.
Okay.
Lean on Me, the Bill Withers version.
It's a fantastic song.
Because it's a camp song. It's what we sing to each other. I had to catch myself before I got emotional there. It's what we sing to each other at the end of every session.
Yeah. So it's just and that's it, man. It's probably the best way to express your emotions, especially if you're not somebody that is good at expressing them just in conversation. I think music, it's the ultimate, this has been said a million times, but it's the ultimate, thing. I don't even know what to call it, but it's everywhere. I mean, it's everywhere in the known universe. If you live on this planet, music will be a part of your life. And I know this podcast is about growing up in the 90s and 2000s, but honestly, a lot of stuff we talked about today is you grew up in any generation, you can probably agree with a lot of the stuff we talked about. Now, we touched on a few artists, obviously, that were big during our time. And we'll probably have future episodes where we talk about specifics around specific bands that were big during those time periods. So we'll probably do a Guns N' Roses episode if you want, or
absolutely,
I'll convince one of them. I'm doing a boy band episode, as I mentioned. So, but in general, music is the ultimate uniter. It really is, and I think
they call it wow, can't talk. They call it the universal language.
Yeah, and it really is. It is truly something that connects us all, because you don't always have to like the same music, but you always, there's always going to be music out there that'll make you feel the same way somebody else felt with something they listened to.
Something I want to do. I want to pose a challenge to your audience. Okay. Something I did with my cousin a few years back, because this particular cousin grew up in West Virginia, whereas I grew up in upstate New York. So I wasn't never really close to them until I moved down here.
Okay.
So a challenge that I want to pose to your audience, whether it's with people that they know in their own circles, or whether they email you so you get to know your audience better, I want your audience to think of 5 songs that they would send to you that would help you get to know them better.
Yeah, I like that. So, well, that's, you know what? We don't really have an email address that we've got set up for listeners right now, but I do have our Facebook page, which you can check out. It's Generation S Podcast. You can actually shoot me a message through there, because that's, I run that, that channel as well. So shoot me a message through that Generation S Podcast on Facebook. If you want me to get to know you, send me those songs, because I think you're absolutely right. 5 songs is not too much. It's just enough to say, okay, I have a pretty good idea of what this person's going to be like if I ever met them face to face.
And those songs can change as you grow. That's the beauty of, relating it to music, is you realize how much you grow as a person based on the music that you're listening to at any stage in your life. That's what I found.
Well, and that goes back to what we talked about, whereas if I hear a certain song, I can tell you where I was when I first listened to it and at what point in my life I was at, right? That's the hard truth of it, is that I can pinpoint that, and it's because it's part of those core memories. So anyway, man, listen, This has been a lot of fun. I really appreciate you coming on here to do this with me. This was great.
Emotional roller coaster.
Really was. My gosh. And I didn't know, because again, we have, stuff laid out. I've got notes here, but
but when you and I have history, I mean, it's hard to kind of stay on the straight and narrow because
that's the thing.
And also it's been quite a long time since we've seen each other. So.
Oh yeah. No, I mean, and even now we're just doing this virtually, obviously. But,
right.
That, and again, it's one of those where, previous episodes have been pretty tight on, topic as far as how it pertains to when we grew up, whereas this definitely, but I think it needed to happen. I think this is something where music is just, it's so much bigger than growing up in the 90s and 2000s. It's bigger than growing up in the 80s or the 2010s or the 50s. It's everywhere. And so I'm glad we kind of touched on it. I'm glad we still talked about how, we experienced it during the time period that most of the people listening to this, hopefully, listen to it as well. So I really appreciate you coming on, man. But I did not want to let you go without having a chance to talk about your podcast, which again, one of the big reasons why I wanted to get into podcasting is because my friend Ryan here started his own, and he's been a great resource. So this is your chance, man. Tell the listeners your podcast. What's it about? What do you guys try to do? Is it a weekly podcast? Is it every other week? How often do you guys release?
We try to release every week.
Okay.
We do it remotely, just like you and I are doing right now. Amanda I like to say that Amanda has a little bit more of a life than I do because she actually has, responsibilities. So we try to do it as much as possible. It's called Chaos and Conversation. We basically started it because we were getting tired of people around us not really being willing to engage in conversation with each other because they were afraid of having different opinions. So that's why we decided to start talking about things that we felt needed to be talked about. And we've been at it for just over a year, and it's a lot of fun. It's a lot of learning experience. And actually, just so your audience knows, we do plan on having you on
Absolutely.
the podcast with us because I didn't want to go into it too much on here because this is more of a nostalgia thing and kind of a fun thing. Whereas when you come on our show, we're going to talk about the psychology of nostalgia.
Okay.
Because there are certain studies that have come out that link nostalgia to mental health. And one of the reasons that Amanda and I talk about mental health a lot is because we started in May of 2021, which is Mental Health Awareness Month.
Yeah. Also kind of prime COVID season too. So you want to talk about mental health. There's
mental health got destroyed over the last 2 years.
Yeah. Well, and I tell you what, man, going back to why I started this podcast, I think part of it was because of COVID-19, where I'm like, listen, I got to do this. I got to do something to get out there and just, connect with people again. And so that's kind of when the wheels started turning for me to want to do something like this. Obviously it's taken as long as it has to get out there, but it's out there, man. And so, and yours is out there and it's really exciting. So if people wanted to listen to you, do you go live and then also then record, or like, how do you do that?
Well, the first couple months we were doing the live thing, and then we would post, we would edit it and then put it up on the platforms and whatnot. We decided, going into what we call the second season, we were just going to do it recorded because it just seemed a little bit more focused. We were able to be more focused. So we just record and we upload. Typically we try every Sunday. Okay. Like I said, Amanda has responsibilities that she needs to tend to because, she's got a family and an actual job, and she actually has to function like a human, which I don't remember what that's like. But, we try to do it as much as possible. Okay. But we do try to be somewhat consistent.
And then what platforms can they find you on?
Well, we do, a video portion on YouTube. We do Spotify, iHeartRadio, wow, I'm glad this is recorded. A platform that we found last July of 2021 called Odyssey, Audacy. Okay. We actually found that when we were in the midst of talking a lot about Chester Bennington's passing. So the reason that we found it was because it was popping up on my recommended as a platform that was promoting a lot of mental health awareness stuff.
Okay. Yeah.
So we found Odyssey. We put ourselves on there. It did take a while to get our podcast listed on there just because it's a different process.
Yeah.
But we were able to use Buzzsprout like you and I use.
Yep.
We were able to use the RSS feed from Buzzsprout and then just upload it into Odyssey. And they approved it, and it's been on there ever since last July.
Awesome, man. Well, very cool. So it sounds like you definitely have plenty of channels for people to check you guys out, which is very exciting. I think that's awesome, man. And absolutely would love to be on your podcast. So just let me know when, and I definitely want to have you back on. Before we started recording, we already talked about some other episodes we want to do. So we'll definitely do this again. So guys, thank you so much for listening to another episode of Generation S. It's a podcast about nostalgia, like you put it, Ryan. And I've said this to you before, but nostalgia, it really is the happiest form of sadness you can have. You know, it's bittersweet. It's melancholy. It's something that I saw actually today, I was looking up quotes on nostalgia because I probably want to use them, and I'm going to go ahead and bust this one out. It was, nostalgia is the candle in the distance that's too far to reach, but close enough to give you hope to keep going forward. And I thought that was pretty awesome. So, again, if you listen to this today, guys, thank you so much. This is a lot of fun for me to do as well. As of right now, it's still a bi-weekly release, but who knows what 2023 will hold. If I can get the bandwidth to get episodes out every week, I'd certainly love to. I've got plenty of stuff to talk about here. And Ryan, again, I'll definitely have you back on in the future, man. This was a lot of fun.
I look forward to it.
Absolutely, man. And guys, thank you so much for listening. This has been so much fun. This is officially episode 7. I know I've put out other episodes, so technically it's like 13 in the release schedule, but this is the 7th official episode. We count those guest list episodes as little mini bonus episodes. So officially lucky 7 here, and a lot of fun. So if you like what you're hearing, don't forget to subscribe on iTunes or Spotify or wherever it is you're listening to this in your directory. It really does help that visibility. I know you hear it from all these podcasts and YouTube shows to hit that subscribe button, but seriously, it does help kind of get the podcast out there for other people to see it and give it a try. And more importantly, you know, to build that awareness, tell a friend, you know, spread the word. I think that's still the most popular way to get a podcast up there in terms of, you know, visibility in the rankings for people to see. So if you know anyone that would enjoy hearing discussions about really anything about growing up in the 90s and early 2000s, just let them know. Have them give it a search and try it out for themselves. And don't forget, we're on other forms of social media as well. You can check us out on Facebook. We're also over on YouTube, and we're doing some pretty cool stuff. It's still early, but we're starting to put out some exclusive content for the YouTube channel. So it'll be things like, you know, video game reviews, movie reviews that are maybe a bit more in-depth and not necessarily the best format for something like a traditional podcast. So make sure you check that out as well. And we'll be back next week. So thank you so much for listening, and we'll talk to you soon.
Goodbye.